Appsense. My name is Brian Hosek. I'm CTO with NTSI. Today I want to talk about application control and how to be an application control freak with Ivanti products. We represent several other manufacturers as well. These are the partners that we deal with. Like John said, pay attention to our YouTube channel. We do videos like this all of the time. We also have a customer signature concierge service. Check out that link down the bottom left to hear more about our concierge service as it relates to support of these products. So today I want to talk about application security. Everyone talks about security, and they're always looking at the weakest link of the chain. So here I have a typical chain of IT technologies, and I want you to try and point out the weak link. Do you think it's the one on the left, the firewall? Do you think it's the antivirus product? Do you think it's like an intrusion prevention system we have over on the right? Or do you think it's the end user? Most of us know pretty easily the weak link is almost always the end user in our chain of security. They introduce quite a few problems that we try our best to solve, but we all know users. They'll find some way to to cause a bigger hole. This is one of my favorite comics, in a boxing match or some kind of MMA fight in data security. In this corner we have firewalls, encryption, antivirus software, and in the other corner we have Dave. Who do you think is going to win this particular fight? A lot of people have been talking about the critical security controls. So the Center for Internet Security put out a top 20 list of critical security controls, things that you need to be paying attention to in your organization as far as a security control perspective. And 20 is a lot of them, and so they actually came back and said, you know what, let's try and focus on the top 5 to start with. And they have an interesting stat here. They say that if you implement the first 5 critical security controls, that can protect against 85% of attacks. So 85% of attacks exploit those top 5 of the critical security controls. So I want to do a deep dive on a couple of them today. I want to focus on number 2 to start with. So CIS control number 2 is the inventory of authorized and unauthorized software. And what they say as part of that critical security control is we need to actively manage via inventory, track, and correct all software on the network so that only authorized software is installed and connected, and the unauthorized software and unmanaged software is found and prevented from installation or execution. Now let's break that into the first half of it, where we inventory and track. That's a relatively straightforward answer. We've had products from Ivanti and other vendors that for the past 20 years you've been able to get a very good inventory of what software applications are running on your network. So at first glance, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I got this one taken care of, not a problem. I inventory my software. But look at the second half of those statements. Making sure that only authorized software is installed and can execute, and unauthorized software is preventing from installation and execution. That one really is a lot more tough than it first looks, and anyone that goes and talks to regular end users know that this is true. We find software all the time that we don't know how they got it, how they got permission to run it. Why is it running on our network? We really have no idea. Why do we really care? Well, I would pose this question back to you guys and say, what applications does your typical user have the access to run? And the short of it is they have all of them. They really can run any application that is out there because of problems like Google Chrome. So, we went through a big initiative, 10-ish years ago that we said, we're going to solve this problem by we're going to be taking away admin rights from our end users. Well, that was definitely a good stride in the right direction, but then manufacturers of software tried to get around that. So, for example, Google Chrome. Google Chrome, I can download from the internet right now today as a non-administrator and install. It installs in the local user's profile. I don't need to have admin rights to be able to do that. Well, what stops them from downloading something else? Google Chrome, we all probably acknowledge, no, that's a good piece of software, we're fine with that. But what keeps them from accidentally downloading malware or maliciously downloading malware or downloading some other third-party application that we don't want them to be able to run? Because of these changes in technology and the way that manufacturers of software are trying to get around our admin rights problem, they've only made the hole bigger in terms of what applications our end users are going to have access to. And really it leads to the fundamental point that Windows is broken from its foundation on up because it allows the user to execute any executable that exists on the system. As long as they can read the file, they can execute it. And that's just a core tenet to the way that Windows was written. And so, you know, that really is a fundamental flaw, in my opinion, of the operating system. But, you know, Microsoft's probably not going to change that because it's been ingrained into the ethos of a lot of the corporate entities out there. But, you know, we need to still tackle that problem. Now, we've tried to tackle that problem in the past, and a lot of products and vendors out there have made technologies like application whitelisting and application blacklisting. But really that just creates two different damn problems. First, let's try and tackle whitelisting. We have a very large overhead in whitelisting. I've heard from many, many different customers that go through the development cycle or the acquisition cycle of application whitelisting technologies. And here's generally what happens with them. They purchase the product and they go and implement it in a very small subset of the organization. They say, oh, we need to get a brand new test machine that's right off the bench from being imaged, it's pristine. And we need to scan that image to look for all the executables that are out there, and we are going to put them in a white list, which is just a list of executables that are good. And what happens is we end up scanning that machine, and we end up finding, you know, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, you know, many, many thousands of executables on these pristine machines. And we look at that list and we say, wow, well, geez, that was a lot more than we thought. We thought we had 100 applications that we run, but with dependencies and other things and system things, it ends up to be a list of, you know, many, many thousands, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 executables. And so we say, oh, okay, well, that's more than we thought, but we can manage that. We can, you know, we can keep track of that. This is a one-time thing. We can move on. Then they go to roll it out in the real world, and they find 20,000, you know, or 15,000 applications or executables. And that really proves to be untenable. We cannot, as a management team, manage a list of thousands of executables. And sure, we tried to do a couple of things like apply reputational things associated with it to try and make that list management easier. But, you know, all in all, it was a flawed idea to begin with because of the way that the systems are, the way that they change. Every time a patch comes out, that list has to be updated before the patch comes out to trust the new technology. And so whitelisting has turned into one of the biggest pieces of shelfware I've ever seen. I can't tell you how many of my customers bought the product, tried to implement the product, couldn't implement it, and stuck it on the shelf, and that was the end of the project. The opposite side of that was blacklisting. Okay, well, let's try and come up with a list of bad things and say we can't run bad things. Well, it's never complete. There's just too many holes in this particular dam. It is never going to be as up to date as it needs to be because of things like, you know, people writing zero-day exploits that, you know, have permutations. Every time that it gets, you know, downloaded, it's a different executable. It changes. Blacklisting is not enough. That's effectively what we're trying to do with antivirus. Everyone knows that antivirus is just not keeping up with the pace of protecting our machines. So the concept of whitelisting and blacklisting as it is known today really is flawed. We need to come up with a different way of doing it, a new technology to be able to prevent these applications from running when we don't want them to. So let's look at something that exists on the computer that we've never really thought about as it relates to the ability to execute. I've taken a screenshot here of a file. In this case, as you can see where it says object name, this is regedit. So C, Windows, regedit. This is an executable that exists on, pretty much every machine. It's there by default. It's something that, you could make the determination whether you think users should run it or not, but we can all pretty say it's not a malicious application. We have an NTFS file attribute called owner. And the owner, right there it says current owner, is owned by the trusted installer. Now, trusted installer is an account that is just the user that installs all of the basic stuff like regedit. You don't actually go and install regedit, it just comes as part of the system. And so it is built into the operating system. We're going to look at that current owner and we're going to evaluate it for criteria whether this particular executable should be able to run. So what does that look like from kind of an execution logic perspective? Well, it would look like this. Starting on the left, a user runs an executable. In this case, they run regedit. We are going to stop and we're going to say, is the NTFS file ownership attribute owned by a trusted owner? Now, who would be trusted owner? The trusted installer, just like you saw that the RedJet was. You can see that I have my administrator account in there, the local admin, the system account. Maybe I want to go throw in there my help desk account because help desk installs applications. Or, maybe I have a service account that my Ivanti products use to push out the product, and it's owned by them. Who is conspicuously missing from that list? The actual end user. The actual end user is never going to be in a trusted ownership list because we don't trust the end user. So the logic is if it's owned by a trusted owner, we are going to execute it. If it's not, then we're not going to execute it. It seems like a very simple principle, and to tell you the truth, it is a very simple principle. Because that ownership already exists, we don't have to maintain a list. It's like whitelisting without the list. And so this gives us a great amount of power to not have to babysit that list of 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 applications. From a security perspective, you probably heard about this concept called the kill chain. These are different phases as malicious software gets into our environment. If you want to break into an organization, you go through reconnaissance and weaponization, et cetera. There's two phases that we are going to have to give the user executables, either in the delivery or in the installation of something that's persistent. Almost always, those things will be done with user privileges, meaning the user will be plugging in that USB drive. The user will be downloading that particular file. So as they exist and as they execute at those two phases of the kill chain, we have the ability to stop that and prevent that from going any further down the line to actually the exfiltration of any data. So how would this look like in a typical, Microsoft scam call? Everybody knows about this. This is, someone calling with a funny accent and saying they're from Microsoft and they need to, there's something wrong with your computer and we need to be able to download it and connect to it. So, what's going to happen is they're going to be redirected to a website and the website is going to ask them to download something. And, I don't care what it is, if it's, a team viewer-like application or some kind of remote access application, the end user is going to download that and they're going to execute that and we're going to deny that from being executed. So even if the user is trying to fall for the trap of a typical Microsoft scam call, we're going to deny that from being executed. So that's where we can really help and take the user's decision tree out of the equation. They are not deciding what applications get executed and which ones are not, and we are. So that's kind of the general idea behind it. So next I kind of want to show you what it looks like in action. So let me get over to my console. Let me first show you the actual, what it looks like in action first. So this is a typical end user device. I'm just running Windows 7 here. I'm a normal user logged into this computer. And you can see I can run typical applications. Here I have Audacity, Eclipse, Evernote, FileZilla, etc. These are typical user applications that have been installed by, the system administrators or pushed out as part of my Ivanti Endpoint Manager. These exist on the system and I have the rights to be able to run them. If I'm the end user and I go and download an application, let's say, for example, I go and download Putty, that's just an exe, it's not even an installer, I can run that executable. It's going to evaluate it for its permissions, as you can see that it has been denied being executed. Because if we open up the properties and go to the security, advanced, and look at the ownership, we can see that I am the owner of that. Now, the first thing that customers always ask me is, well, that's silly, just go and change the owner. Well, the bedrock of almost all Windows security is the NTFS file system. So being able to change this, requires things like administrative rights. I don't have administrative rights. I can't change that to belong to a different owner. Now, is it 100% foolproof? No. There are ways to get around it. If you shut down the machine and you didn't have encryption, they booted off a USB drive and they monked it with the NTFS file system. But you know what? We're trying to solve 99.9% of the problems. That last 0.1%, if they have the ability to do that, they're going to be able to figure out a way to run applications. But we want to focus on the majority of your users and controlling what they have the rights to be able to run. So that's what it looks like from an end user's perspective. Let's go look what it looks like from an administrator's perspective. Here is my console for the Ivanti Application Control. You can see it says powered by Appsense. Appsense was a company that then Landesk, now Ivanti, acquired about 18 months ago and is integrating their technology into the Ivanti core platform. This is the tool that we use to control the application control system. So first of all, you can see here we have our trusted owners. This is where you can control who you trust in your organization. Again, you may want to come in here and say, well, we have a group of help desk technicians. I want to add that. Or I want to go and add, you know, the XYZ account that is pushing out software on our behalf. Maybe it's SCCM, maybe it's Ivanti Endpoint Manager. We can add service accounts. Again, as long as we're not putting regular end users in this box, we still succeed with the primary objective of keeping them from being able to run whatever applications that they want to. So you can see that we have the ability to do things based on group. So here we have administrators, here we have everyone. I can go and add a group rule based on, you know, for example, down there we have, you know, finance and then payroll. So we can apply policies based on group membership. We can do it based on individual users, individual devices, etc. As we click on this, you can see that we have a slider bar for applications. You live in a world today that is essentially this over on the right-hand side, unrestricted. And what that generally means is if the user has NTFS read rights to an executable, they're allowed to execute. That's just, again, the default logic as part of a Microsoft operating system. Your goal is to get down here for everyone over to the left-hand side where it's restricted. And the idea behind this is kind of that workflow or that execution logic that I've described so far, that unless that application is owned by a trusted owner, it doesn't have the rights to run. Now, we have a couple of middle ground ones where maybe we're just logging or we're giving the user the ability to override the system if they choose. Those are maybe good for proof of concepts and, you know, maybe selective users long term, but you really want to get all the way over here to restricted. Now, back to my example of running those applications that I ran, you know, I was running Firefox and Eclipse and et cetera. Where do those exist in the ecosystem of a whitelist? Well, the short answer is they don't. I have my allowed items, which these are just kind of the prefabricated ones to make sure that all the Appsense stuff has the ability to run. But notice that Firefox and Eclipse and things like that don't exist here in our allowed items. You don't need to populate this with the applications that run in your ecosystem because you already did that with both the NTFS file ownership attribute. Now, there will be an occasional exception where, oh, yes, it does turn out that this accounting department person downloads this application and runs it on their computer on their own. So that may be an exception to the rule. You may have a few of those. So you could go in here and say, oh, this is, you know, accounting software .exe. I want to give this permission to run, as you can see down there at the bottom, to run even if they're not a trusted owner. So you do have the ability to create these exceptions. And what my customers tell me is they'll go create exceptions, but, you know, they're creating 5 or 6 exceptions. You know, so you have to manage a list of 5 or 6 applications, not a list of you know, thousands upon thousands of applications. Next, we have the denied items. You know, again, with that concept of whitelisting and blacklisting, where's the list of denied applications? Well, it doesn't exist. It just simply says deny everything by default. We're going to check that NTFS file ownership permission. So your denied items is going to be, you know, surprisingly blank. It's just not going to exist in the ecosystem. You're only going to have to manage to the exception instead of managing to the, you know, thousands of applications that we have out there. So a very basic concept, but in execution, it really is as simple as it sounds, unlike all the other whitelisting and blacklisting technologies that you've seen out there. All right, next, I want to jump back to the presentation here and talk about one additional control in that critical security control list, and that's number 5. And this has to do with the control of administrative privileges. So we've already talked about that a little bit, that, you know, 10 plus years ago, we had this big concept, let's take away admin rights from our end users. And when I talk to my customers, there's varying levels of success. There's people that have failed miserably and everyone's still an admin, and there's people that have gone the distance all the way and said, you know, that we no longer have any administrators, you know, even our help desk logs into their own accounts as a non-administrator. And really that creates 2 different problems that we have. Number one, for the users that do still have admin rights, they are still local admins. You know, they can do whatever they want. They can remove themselves from the domain. They can turn off antivirus. They can uninstall anything that they want to. And then on the other side, we don't have enough rights for certain actions. Now they just have to call the help desk. A user needs to add a printer. Well, who cares about adding printers? That's usually not that big of a deal. However, we have taken that right away because that was an administrative function to be able to do. What about installing a font? They can't install fonts. They can't, you know, do a lot of things that maybe you want those users to do, because Windows is kind of a black and white world. You're a local admin or you're not a local admin. As simple as that. So how can we use the same product to increase the flexibility of admin rights? And instead of having the black and white world where you're using a sledgehammer, let's have a scalpel to be able to give out rights. So here could be the execution logic of a typical application or a function. So it could be running regedit, or it could be going into the control panel and clicking on devices and printers. It doesn't have to be a .exe for our function to be able to run. But the idea is we can have a built-in elevate and we can have a built-in restrict. And you can choose that per application or per function. And elevate means give the user admin rights to run this function. And the restrict says take away the rights from this particular function. Now, you're going to use it for different scenarios. For example, elevate. Let's go and elevate a regular end user to have the ability to install a printer. Let's elevate a regular end user to be able to install a font. And to restrict, let's go and take someone we can't take rights away from. Developers. Developers need to be local admin. Well, why do they need to be admin? Well, just because they say so. Let's go and restrict that developer to say things like, well, you can't remove yourself from the domain. You can't uninstall antivirus. But you better believe you're a local admin. So we can have it work kind of in both directions to give us a more nuanced approach to administrative rights instead of, again, that black and white world that we've lived in before. So let's jump over and see kind of what that looks like. Let's start with a end user's perspective. Again, here's my same example account. I'm not an administrator. I can't even run PuTTY. I've downloaded this great font, and I want to go and install this font. I'm going to double-click on it. You can see here's our font viewing application. Right here at the top, this is the shield. Most people will recognize this is an admin level function that's going to happen. So normally an end user would click on this, it would pop up with the UAC box, it would ask for admin rights, and the user would then call the help desk, get a ticket, and follow up. It's just a horrible end user experience. For my system, I've gone and allowed the installation of fonts for end users. So I'm going to click on install, and other than the font already being there and asking if I want to replace it or not, I'm going to say yes to that. A regular end user just did an admin level function by installing that font. Now, the end user didn't even know. The experience was seamless and invisible to the end user. They just simply double-clicked on the font and clicked install, and away they go. So how did we make that happen? What was the process behind that? So let's jump back over to our administrative console here. I'm actually going to load up a configuration that is a little bit more exciting. So give me a second, let me open that up. So I've created several groups in here already. I have a help desk group, I have an everyone group, I have administrators. So let's go look at our everyone group. We can look at our allowed items. Again, we don't have any items in our allowed or denied list, generally speaking. But here under user privileges, we've gone and created different actions that we can do to give out different rights. So for example, here's my example of font view. Font view is actually just that application that you saw popped up. What I'm going to do is when fontview.exe runs, I am going to choose the policy down here at the bottom called built-in elevate. That means spawn that particular process as an administrator and allow administrative rights when that process runs. You can see that I can give it to child processes. Maybe fontview.exe calls fontinstaller.exe or whatever, and you need that to have admin rights as well. No problem, we can check that box. But you can avoid common pitfalls in security like the common dialog box. That's like a file open. If I'm really crafty, I can, run the font view application, click file open, go find command.exe and run it, and then that runs as admin. So you can have very nuanced from a process perspective, but maybe not on a common dialog box. And then lastly, you can see we can have it install as a trusted owner instead of the end user. That way we can prevent this from happening in the future if it was actually, putting files in place and we wanted to correct that NTFS file ownership. So you can see, very simple to go through and elevate a particular function or a particular application to be able to run. You know, here's, for example, Chrome Setup. I can give Chrome Setup the ability to install as administrator instead of installing into the profile account. I can control it based on the metadata, only do it when it's this version or that version, or it comes from this vendor or has this particular company name in it. Next, we can deal with components. Components are, again, not things that are executables and things like that, but they are functions that, you know, exist inside of the system. So things that show up in the control panel, you know, you can see, you know, uninstall, adding hardware, Windows updates, date and time, event viewer, etc. You can simply add it in here, and over on the right-hand side, use this drop-down box to say whether you want to restrict it or you want to elevate it. Now, in this context, the user is already not an admin, so they're not going to be able to do much of these functions regardless. So I would be giving out probably elevate rights. You know, for example, if I want them to be able to do printers, I can do built-in elevate. I want them to open up services, I want to elevate. But then maybe on your help desk example, you want to lock down your help desk people or developers or someone that does have admin rights. You want to stop them from, you know, playing around with the Windows Defender setting, for example. I can go over on the right-hand side and say I want to do a built-in restrict. We can get even more specific than that. We can say things like this. In the uninstall control section, if they try and uninstall an Ivanti product, I want to use built-in restrict. I don't want them to be able to remove that. They can add software, they can remove software, but the minute they go try and touch this, I want to stop it. Same thing with services. Maybe I want to stop them, their ability to stop certain critical services that are important to us from a security perspective. You can't stop the antivirus service. You can't stop the, you know, XYZ service. It doesn't matter what it is. You can pick it over here on the right to built-in restrict. They could be full domain admin and have every right in the world, but if they log into a machine with the application control agent on it, we're going to stop their ability to stop those services. On the flip side, maybe you want to give out service rights. You know, the print spooler. You know, the end user should be able to probably restart the print spooler. That sometimes gets, you know, stuck and needs a good restart. So this is where we can do a built-in elevate and give that right out to the end user. Now, we can get even more nuanced than that. We can do it from an application perspective and say things like, well, go back to that developer example. Why does the developer say that they need admin rights? Well, because they debug a program or something like that. Well, I can actually say things like, if Visual Studio.exe, you know, if their development program, their IDE is running, I want to be able to apply a particular policy. In this case, I'm going to apply this policy called developers. Up here under my user privilege policies, I have developers. I can apply it to a particular user group. I have a developer user group. And then here's my privilege. These are things that are invisible to you. They exist on the system, but we usually don't see them on the front end. Things like debugging a program. Do you have the rights to debug a program? I can go over on the right and say, yes, give that out. Do you have the rights to load and unload device drivers? Sometimes developers need to be able to do that. Then yes, let's go ahead and enable that. Or maybe profile a single process. So now what I'm doing is I can go to those developers and I can say, I can give you all the privileges that you need and you still don't need to be an administrator. And I can just control that with the applications that run and what functions they're going to run, you know, what that process has the ability to do when it gets executed. So you can be very, very nuanced with that. Or if you can't win that political battle and it's just never going to happen, fine, Mr. Developer, you are a full administrator. Good luck with that. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to restrict your ability to uninstall this, restrict your ability to remove yourself from the domain, restrict your ability from stopping this service. So we can kind of go the opposite direction and you know, lock them down. One great thing about this technology is it's essentially an offline technology. It's not like you have to call the server every time an executable wants to be run by an end user. Since we're evaluating that local NTFS file ownership attribute, we don't need to call to anything. So this works even when the machine is offline, when they don't have internet access, when they're on a plane. All of these functions still have the ability to work. Like I described, you can be very flexible with how you deploy it. You can deploy it at the user level. You can deploy it at the device level. You can even do it at the process level. When we recognize certain processes running, then we want to behave in certain ways. Everything is logged and analyzed so that you can come back and see, what things are being run on the machine, what rights are being executed, etc. So that was kind of a quick run through of the Ivanti's application control technology. Again, it came from the Appsense acquisition. And it really is one of my favorite technologies to talk about these days. A lot of the customers that we talk to are very excited about it because of the things that it can bring to the table that everyone's always wanted for the past many years, but no vendor has been able to fulfill on without those whitelists and blacklists of thousands of items. So I'll kind of open it up to Q&A here and see if anyone has any questions. Please just type it into the question and answer box there, and we see if we can help resolve it. We have one question here. Will a copy of the presentation be available online? Yes, absolutely. So what we do is we record these presentations and then, within a day or so, upload them to our YouTube channel. And so you should be able to grab that off of our YouTube channel and rewatch it. Here's my contact information if anyone wants to have further information. Obviously, you've probably worked with us before, one of our existing customers. If not, you can just call our main telephone number there, and we can get you some help. If I have sparked some interest and you like what you see, please let your salesperson know. We can go into more in-depth dive on how the technology works. This is a very, very quick overview, as well as doing proof of concepts. I did a recent proof of concept with a customer that has 25,000 devices, and we didn't deploy it out to all of them, but we were able to do an entire proof of concept in a half of a day. And so it's very easy to kind of kick the tires on and see how the technology works. Another question, does this console integrate with Ivanti Endpoint Manager? The short answer is it will. This upcoming release of Ivanti Endpoint Manager, formerly called Land Desk Management Suite, is going to include some of the Appsense technology, most likely the Environment Manager, something kind of for a different conversation for a different day. But it will eventually. It's on their roadmap. They want to integrate it as fast as they can. And so you will see it in the main Endpoint Manager console eventually. From a licensing perspective, that's a different conversation. We don't know what that's going to look like. My guess is that they're going to make us pay for the license to be able to use the technology, but that's still kind of up in the air and something we're going to have to look at. Okay, another question here. Are you able to run it passively for reporting purposes and see what our users are doing first and present to stakeholders for approval? Absolutely. So back here in our configuration, you can very easily go in here and say Audit Only. What Audit Only does is gives you the ability to run the application silently. Audit Only is never going to pop up with anything. It's never going to stop anyone. It's simply going to run in the background and log all of that information. And then we could build a security policy around that, say we're having this problem or these applications are being authorized and they shouldn't necessarily be. That's why we have our endpoint analysis here. I don't think I have any recorded data, but what will happen is this list will kind of fill up of all the applications that are being run, who are they owned by, etc. So yes, you can. That's a very, very common way to do it from a proof of concept perspective. We can't go from 0 to 100 miles an hour and just start blocking one day. So it's very convenient to say, nope, let's go audit only. Let's run for a month, and then even go in and laser focus. Hey, let's just pick a pilot group. Let's pick the finance department and just start blocking with them so that we can have a lot smaller scale. And approach it kind of with smaller bites versus doing it everywhere. Another question, are you guys located in Southern California? We are not. Our headquarters is based in Bountiful, Utah. However, we cover Southern California and have many customers down Southern California and have territory representatives that cover that. So we should be able to still take care of you, not only in Southern California, but we have customers across the United States. Another question, is there general info on what overhead, CPU, memory, bandwidth, etc.? The short answer is yes, we can kind of get you that information, but here's kind of a different twist on that. We only need to evaluate whether we are going to authorize an executable when that executable is run, when a user double clicks on that, or when another process kicks that off. So if you really think about it, it's not like antivirus that scans every file, every DLL, every text file, every PowerPoint. You know, that's a lot of garbage to scan through. And so we are going to be a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what antivirus would, because we're only evaluating it at execution time of that EXE. As soon as that EXE has started and we have approved it, we don't look at that executable anymore. It's approved, it's done, we go back into a dormant state. So from an overhead perspective, we really don't have any concerns from that component, because we are so quiet and so focused on one component, the execution of that process, and then we kind of, you know, set it out to pasture and let it go. And we don't care about all the other garbage that it's looking at. So opening up the PDF file, whatever, it doesn't matter to us. That's not, you know, our concern. We're focused on those executables. Another question: when granting elevated privileges, do you have access to the current user context like map drives? So the short answer is yes, we do. You have the ability to open when you create an application and you create that process, like for example, user privilege, here's my font view.exe. This common dialog box is what you're describing of like opening up a network drive. If you check this box, when I open up that network drive, I have local admin rights. If I uncheck this, I can still have access to that local network drive. I just no longer have admin rights. So you will still be able to go and find those documents on the network or whatever. We just need to decide whether that box that spawns open is running with elevated privileges, but it's always under the user's context. So it still sees their profile and their map drives and, you know, things like that. Okay, next question. I'm assuming the application control is a client you typically deploy. Will this eventually be integrated in Endpoint Manager agent? So again, short answer, yes, it will eventually be integrated. Long answer is I don't know the exact date on that. They're slowly but surely bringing over all these components to Endpoint Manager. As it stands today, we have something called the Management Console, and this gives you the ability to push out the package, which is the agent. You know, here I have a 32-bit agent, a 64-bit agent, and then the configuration. And so these are the components that are going to be wrapped into the Endpoint Manager console. If you look into this product today, you absolutely need to have this. Otherwise, well, you don't have to have it. You would just have to go and create manual packages in Endpoint Manager, which is totally doable. You can do it, but it's not like just a single checkbox that, bam, it's integrated, away we go. So you'd have to create your own software distribution tasks for this. Not impossible, but just, you know, something you have to do. But in the short run, we're going to have Appsense components exist in Endpoint Manager. I don't think those are going to be the application control first. I think they're going to be some of the environment manager technologies, but it's absolutely on the list for as soon as realistically possible to get this over into Endpoint Manager. Okay, another question. Does it support Citrix XenApp? For example, granular control for the same process, but different users or groups? Absolutely. So we support lots of different kind of, you know, terminal server, Citrix XenApp, XenDesktop, etc. All of those VDI and terminal server-like applications are supported. And if you use something like XenApp, then it's a slam dunk when you start talking about Environment Manager. That's our really amazing profile management system that stores the profile data in a database instead of, you know, roaming profiles or the traditional profiles we have on machines. So when you start bringing the two together, then it's a real slam dunk for terminal server and VDI and situations like this. So yes, we support Citrix XenApp, and you would be really interested to hear more about our Environment Manager, because it really is a great one-two punch there. Okay, so I think that's all of our Q&A. No more questions I see coming through. I appreciate everyone attending. This doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. Again, you see my email address right there if you want to hit me up and ask a further question, or something comes up later. Oh, what about this? What about that? Absolutely, please send it my way. I'd be happy to answer that. One last question that came in. We have Ivanti Endpoint Manager, endpoint security for Ivanti Endpoint Manager. Will this app control be incorporated into those apps? Short answer, yes, it will be incorporated. The long answer of will you get the licensing rights for free is up in the air. I don't have an answer to that. So I can't say, yes, you'll for sure get it for free, or yes, you'll have to pay for it. I don't know. But from a technology standpoint, yes, it will be right there in the console to be able to turn on. We'll just have to find out in the long run whether you have to pay for it. So that's still to be determined. If you guys weren't aware of, Ivanti came out with a great new enterprise licensing agreement because they have so many products out there and a broad swath of products. So the enterprise license agreement is a great way to look into multiple products. If you're looking into, Endpoint Manager and Appsense and Ivanti Service Manager and the new Res acquisition and, so on and so forth, the enterprise license agreement looks very attractive because it's, it can give you access to everything. Hey, here's the entire suite. It's 37 products. Good luck. You can have access to all. Okay, one more question. Does this process work on remote machines, laptops that are occasionally connected to our domain via the VPN or the CSA? So the product that we talked about today, Application Control, absolutely. It can work completely offline. If they never connected to VPN and they never connected through the CSA, it would still function. Now, if we update something where we go in here and say, oh, we need to create an exception for, something.exe, we need to get that machine back online for it to receive a policy update. But if they're disconnected and dormant and offline, the existing policy that is in place will still apply, and they still have the ability to have those machines protected. And if they ever need an exception, like they call in and say, hey, I'm in a hotel, but I can't get on the Wi-Fi, I need to have an exception to run a particular application. We have an offline version that they'd give us a token code, and then we repeat that a number process. They type it in, and it gives them a one-time exception for that application. All right, one more question, maybe not the last question, but another one. Does this integrate into the Ivanti Endpoint Manager inventory database? The basics today, meaning it will show up as a software application that it is installed, and the version, but not much more. And again, that will be expanded as we go through. I see it actually being an agent setting, like you have agent settings in Ivanti Endpoint Manager today. Just like you have remote control, reboot, distribution, and patch, we're going to have an application control setting. And so then it will be incredibly integrated. So it will eventually, short term, it's really just showing up the software is installed on the machine. Okay, looks like our questions have kind of come to an end. So again, I'll put it out there. I appreciate everyone attending. If anyone has any questions or further follow-up, please hit up me or your salesperson. Appreciate everyone coming, and enjoy your lunch and have a great day.